All the roll and go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?
Hello, and welcome to Where Am I to Go podcast. Today we are at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana. We are here for a special exhibit called Dragons, Unicorns, and Mermaids, Mythic Creatures. And this is a traveling display. We are going to go through it with Scott, who I am hoping is the master knowledge man of all things mystic.
Why don't we just say all things?
Ooh,
how about that?
We're just going to go with that.
Yeah,
I like that.
Big umbrella.
Big umbrella.
Big umbrella.
All things.
Okay.
Okay. And he's going to take us through this display. It is a traveling display.
That's correct. So yeah, this exhibit is in our changing exhibit hall, where we put a lot of traveling exhibits that we bring in year to year, actually quarter to quarter sometimes. And this particular exhibit, Mythic Creatures, is from the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. It's the first time we've ever had an AMNH exhibit here, which is pretty cool. And it is actually, you're getting a lot of bang for your buck here, because it's actually about 8,000 square feet that we fit in a 6,000 square foot space. And
it doesn't feel that tight, but there is a lot to see.
There's a lot to see, and there's a few areas that if I had just a few more linear feet, I'd spread things out just a bit. But we wanted to utilize the height that we have with our ceilings in here. So if you come in, you'll see manatees, and you'll see sharks, and you'll see Asian dragons, and all manner of creature kind of at various levels throughout the exhibit. The exhibit talks about where the origins for many of these creatures and beasts and monsters that have dominated our myths, legends, lores for thousands of years, where they may have come from, where the origins are. And it's an exhibit that blends cultural history, it blends science, even a little bit of paleontology, and then of course, a little bit of fantasy too. And it's pretty exciting. It's broken into a couple of different realms as you walk through. There's a water realm, there is an air realm, there's a land realm, and then there's the dragons who occupy all these realms. So you find water dragons, dragons can fly, dragons that are in mountains, and so it's really been a very successful exhibit. It's fun. There's a fair number of interactives in here. There's a lot of quote-unquote life-size recreations of dragons and kraken and other fantasy animals. So we were really excited to have it here.
Okay, now to begin this thing, how many of these mythical creatures actually have basis in reality? So the reason I'm asking this, I asked the paleontologist that I was just talking to about basically the same question. You've got all these different cultures from around the world that have, let's just take the dragon.
Sure.
The dragon shows up in Europe. It shows up in Native American mythology. It shows up in Japan. It shows up in China. It shows up everywhere in the world.
Yep.
And yet this is a mythical creature that none of these cultures probably had talked to each other about. And yet somehow or another it appears in all of these cultures to where you would almost have to say it is real, or was real, or that it lived amongst us at one point in time.
Well, we can start off by prefacing by saying there is no evidence of giant winged fire-breathing creatures in the fossil record or scientific record. But there are evidences of large animals that lived long before humans, that left their bones in the ground, which are dinosaurs and other fossil animals. So it's likely that ancient peoples in all these different cultures would have seen the same bones that we see weathering out in badlands all over the United States, Mongolia, South America, all these places. And they knew what bones looked like. I mean, they were butchering animals, eating them. Loved ones passing away. They would have seen bones and understood what they were of modern animals that lived in their area. So imagine them walking by a hill, and all of a sudden they come across a leg bone, a femur, or a shin bone like a tibia in that hillside from a dinosaur. They didn't know what dinosaurs were, but they knew that was a giant bone, and that bone was 5 feet long. And they knew that, that looks like the same kind of, or similar to a bone that's in my leg, but mine is 14 inches long, and this thing is 5 feet long. So, and they would have seen claws, fossil claws. They would have seen fossil teeth, and so and you have dinosaurs that were on every continent in the whole world, even Antarctica.
Okay.
So it would make sense that some of these myths and legends would develop independently, but come up with a similar result. And then as the world starts to shrink, you'll see that these stories of dragons and other mythical creatures really proliferate kind of between the 1200s and the 1500s.
Right.
And what was happening in the 1200s and 1500s? We were getting on ships and sailing all over the world and passing stories back and forth. Your guys on your ships would see things out in the ocean, and then they would end up in, the Middle East or China or Japan or these other places, and they would say, well, we saw this thing out there, blah, 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 and that would tie right into some of the myths and legends of that culture. Oh, what you saw was this animal, and et cetera. Oh, really? And then they would take that story back when they would go home and say, oh, yeah, they've got creatures over there too. And so this kind of confirms or substantiates some of these oral stories. And that's how you get maps like this in the 1500s. And this gets passed around. So, if you were someone, you're a sailor, you've got limited education, you maybe even got shanghaied onto a ship or gang pressed onto a ship, and you see maps like this that have all these bizarre looking creatures, you look at this and say, oh, well, this has been printed. Somebody wrote these books. It must be real, right?
Right.
Whether or not you've actually seen one or not. And if you take a look at some of these creatures, this is, people, 500, 600, 700 years ago trying to, rationalize what they were seeing. So a lot of your creatures, like you said, look at these sea creatures. That's got the head of a horse.
Right.
But it's got flippers and a long
mermaid
tail. So some of the things that they would see, they would try to more or less merge them with things that they knew, which is mostly land animals, horses. I mean, if you look at all these things,
right,
all of them kind of have their faces look like creatures, like wolves
or pigs,
and pigs and things like that. So you would kind of get this merger of species, because again, they're trying to make sense of things they're seeing or they're hearing about from visiting different countries, different islands, things like that. So it's not, to me, it's not a surprise that some of these stories have a similar protagonist or antagonist in the case of the dragon.
Okay.
What I think is interesting is some of the interpretations are completely different. Asian dragons are awesome. Asian dragons were protectors of villages and communities. They could change the weather, bring rain. If you had a good Asian dragon, you could expect good crops, all that kind of stuff. European dragons, I always say, if you remember Monty Python and the Holy Grail, there's this scene where they're running from the rabbit, yelling, "Run away, run away." You see a European dragon, you run away. Those things were vicious, mean, greedy. They were hoarding treasure. They were taking your stuff, taking your animals. whereas the Asian dragons were a lot of times givers of good fortune. And in fact, for many Asian cultures, the term dragon meant wisdom and power.
Oh, really?
Yep. And so some emperors were given the title dragon. That was an honorific thing. Like, oh, you couldn't have a higher title than the dragon. So I find it interesting that while you have some similar stories on what these things looked like, wings, but some of the Asian dragons didn't have wings. They were long, slender, serpentine. Some were aquatic. Their personalities and traits were wholly different. Like
That's interesting.
The European dragons, you avoid those as much as possible. The Asian dragons were, for the most part, wise and powerful and could be a very good thing for your community.
And then there was always Puff.
Then there's Puff. That's right. Other animals that have, a natural history origin are things like the kraken. Again, the kraken is this giant squid octopus-like animal that lived out in the oceans and seaways, and woe be to any ship sailor that came across one, because you see all these pieces of art showing them taking whole ships down. And if you come into the room here, you'll see tentacles up on all sides of the wall.
Right. You also have a mermaid.
Yep.
Or a little. I've seen this before. The Great Hoax.
The Great Hoax, Fiji Mermaid, and P.T. Barnum, and mermaids again. Sirens, mermaids. These stories go back to actually Roman times. And again, you have you have people sailing, you have people going out in the oceans and seas, and they would see things. Many of them didn't know what a dolphin really was, or a manatee. In fact, Christopher Columbus came across manatees when he sailed by Cuba, and thought they were mermaids. In fact, writes in his journal, he's like, I came across some mermaids today. They were a lot less attractive than they thought they'd be. And he was undoubtedly talking about manatees. He kind of calls them corpulent and rotund. And it's like, well, there's a manatee. That's undoubtedly what he saw. The kraken it has a natural history origin. There are giant squid and giant octopus that live in the oceans today. The colossal squid and giant squid can be, 40, 50 feet long.
Right.
And so every now and again, their corpses wash up on the shore. There's actually a story, I think in the 1100s, a Scandinavian king was walking along one of the shores of Sweden and came across what turned out to be a giant squid that had died and washed ashore. He drew some sketches of it, and said, "Oh, this must be a small kraken." And we have in the exhibit here, we actually have a tentacle from a giant squid that's in preservative that you can see, and then there's some size comparisons of giant squid to things like a sperm whale. The other thing that people would have seen back then too is the whaling was going on. You would have seen sperm whales, and you can see them today, where they'll have battle scars all over their heads, scrapes and suction marks and all this kind of stuff. And you would have seen tentacles like this and said, oh, they must have been doing battle with a great kraken and things like that. So, the kraken's another example of something that has a natural history origin. As we transition from the water to the air, again, we've got
hammerhead shark hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah, we got a shark here. Again, sharks, stingrays, manatees. These are all things that if you had seen them some distance away, like for example, here's an interactive right here. This is a pod of whales. If you are half a mile away and you see a pod of whales swimming along and you see something like that, where you don't see the whole animal, you just see their backs and their humps and whatnot, it would be pretty easy to extrapolate that you just saw as opposed to 3 or 4 whales swimming, you've seen a giant sea serpent.
Yeah.
And so, again, a lot of these animals that we see today and kind of take for granted, when a sailor who, was gang pressed, out of some town in Spain and put on a galleon and sent out, saw a stingray or a hammerhead shark for the first time, they probably had a whole bunch of ideas of what that could have been as opposed to what it actually was.
Can you imagine that experience, being shanghaied?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
wake up one day and you're on a ship out in the middle of the ocean, and you're going, I wonder what happened here.
So yeah, we talk a fair bit about mermaids and again, various cultures. And again, some of the early sirens, some of the early siren stories were one of,
the Odyssey.
The Odyssey. They would call sailors to their doom and things like that. But then in other cultures, mermaids are, again, bringers of fortune, and
right.
if you treat them right, they will treat you right. So that's not always bad news if you come across some of these creatures.
You've got an eagle hanging from the ceiling here as we get into the air.
Yeah. So
this is huge. This
is a giant bird that was called a mythical bird called the Roc, R-O-C, It's the Roc is actually referred to in some of Marco Polo's tales.
Oh, really?
Yep. It was the story comes from the Middle East, around about between 700, I think, and 1,000 years ago, or sorry, between 700 AD and 1,000 AD. There was this myth of a giant eagle-like bird that was so big that it could carry elephants away.
Wow.
And so what you have here is a giant reconstruction. It's got an over 20-foot wingspan, a giant grasping claws. And what's interesting is that while we don't have any evidence of a giant eagle that could carry away elephants, we do have evidence of giant birds that lived in places like Madagascar, called elephant birds. There's actually a reconstruction just right around the corner that is life-sized. And Marco Polo talks about seeing a roc fly off towards Madagascar. He goes to Madagascar, finds these giant eggs in Madagascar. Didn't find any birds, but found bones of birds and things like that. Well, what he was looking at was these giant elephant birds. And elephant birds were giant, flightless birds. If think about it like an ostrich on steroids.
Okay.
I guess is the best way to
Are they
describe
extinct now?
They're extinct.
Okay.
In fact, they go extinct around the time that humans make their way to Madagascar about a little over 1,000 years ago. They were likely hunted. And their eggs, which were ginormous, it can still be found today as they're not quite fossils. We call them subfossils. So Marco Polo and other explorers of the time undoubtedly ran across their remains, their eggs, and said, oh, well, this is definitely the Roc. The Roc exists.
Wow.
And what they were looking at was a very large bird. One so large, it was flightless, and two, even if it could fly, it wouldn't be big enough to take an elephant.
Right.
And we have...
But a human.
Yeah.
This one right here, I could see it picking me up.
Yeah. Well, and like an elephant... So a lot of people look at the big flightless birds that live today and go, oh, they're kind of weird looking, but they can be quite dangerous. A kick from an ostrich or a rhea can kill a person. So just imagine one that's 10 feet tall.
Yeah.
We have a lot of stuff from the Greek mythology, like the Pegasus, which of course was featured in some movies like Clash of the Titans and things like that. Perseus flies around on the Pegasus.
Right.
What I again find interesting is, these creatures dominated mythical lore going back, almost 3,000 years now. And there's still a place in our modern mythos, lexicon, and storytelling where they still have a home, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. And this is a carved Pegasus that you've got here.
Yep.
It's almost like a merry-go-round.
It kind of does have that merry-go-round look to it. Yep. And there's actually several different artists that were involved in creating some of these reconstructions, like the Rock and the Pegasus and things like that.
Didn't Buddy Holly sing a song about Pegasus?
That's close, yes.
Sorry.
As we round the corner here, we've got this is the elephant bird.
Oh, geez.
And so again, this was a giant flightless bird that lived up to just around 1,000 years ago.
No, this is one that they've reconstructed from actual size and proportions.
Yep. So they
almost looks like an ostrich with elephantitis.
Yes. Yeah. It's huge.
It's huge.
And that is the actual size of the eggs that elephant birds would lay. And
the size of the egg, I would say, would be comparable to a oblong bowling ball.
Yeah.
It's big.
Yep. If for those of you who roll 16, 17 pounders, that's
a huge egg.
And there was another.
That's pretty cool that you've got a full mounted. It's neat to me when you're able to see these creatures that, like let's say a mammoth.
Yep.
And they're able to recreate and bring them back. Have you ever seen the Irish moose?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Those things, they had horns that were 10, 12 foot. Horn span.
Yep, you had Irish elk and stag
Irish
moose.
elk, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, and there's a full mounted one of those in Tucson, Arizona at the Safari Club International. And it's just an amazing animal, as big as it is. And same thing with this. It's just, you look at it and you're going, holy smokes, how would you like to live amongst that?
Yeah, they were bringing skeletons back of elephant birds, by the 1800s to museums. Museums are a fairly new thing. Museums kind of started getting their start in the mid-1800s. They were born out of the Age of Reason, which was, the 1700s, that everything had a natural place and natural setting. And so, you had big cities like London, Berlin, Paris that all started to develop museums in the mid-1800s. Well, you got to put things in it.
Right.
So, they would send out a naturalist on some of these ships and be like, we need you to collect things for the museum, et cetera. And so some of them would bring back skeletons of these elephant birds after they went to Madagascar. So like here's a Victorian drawing of some visitors at a museum looking at a skeleton for one of these elephant birds. So yeah, a lot of natural tie-in to some of these myths, which again makes a lot of sense.
Actually, they were bigger ones, but
What is this?
Oh, so this is cool.
This looks like a Afghan hound the size of a horse.
So
this is about the only way I can describe it.
This is a barong. So barongs again are not one of these creatures that could be good fortune if it was to basically take favor with your village or your community. And it usually was trying to ward off other evil creatures and things like that. It was also known kind of as a prankster, and had a sense of humor. So here we have this is Rangda. This is the creature that would often battle the barong. The barong is basically the good guy, bad guy, so this was This was a myth that was in the Bali culture.
Okay.
And today they still, if you see parades in some of the Asian communities, India and whatnot, you'll see the barong still represented there. And yeah,
Okay.
it has a very ornamental face and a beard, big eyes, fangs, very colorful, a big quadruped with a tail, hairy body. And again, if you go to Indonesia, is something that you still see kind of revered today in their culture.
And this must have been a costume that they wore for parades with a guy in the front and a guy in the back.
Here we have a griffin statue, and we actually talk about the griffin a little bit later on here on where its origins are. So griffin, of course, has kind of like an eagle-looking face, wings, but then kind of a body of a lion. And as we get further in, you'll see that there is potentially a good paleontology origin for this thing.
Oh, really?
Yep. The chupacabra.
The chupacabra.
Which I didn't know until the exhibit came as a fairly new mythical creature that comes out of Mexico, Central America, and is this potentially kind of blood-sucking creature. Sometimes it has wings and fangs and horns, and sometimes it's bipedal, sometimes it's quadrupedal. And what's interesting is that if you do a Google search or for images of a chupacabra, what pops up a lot are things that look quite a bit like dogs, coyotes, things like that have mange.
Yeah.
A
They don't have hair.
lot of the time, it's been described as an animal that it's hairless or scaly, things like that. And pretty much every picture I've seen, I'm like, well, that's a coyote with mange, and you might have some hair, tufts on the tail or tufts of hair around the face and neck, but then the body is hairless. And so anyhow, it's interesting. Some of the first chupacabra tales and stories coming out of the late 1970s. That's how recent it is.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yep.
I figured it was older than that. Huh.
And then, of course, again, we go back to various cultures having similar stories of giant ape-like people, and we do have in the fossil record giant apes like Gigantopithecus. Here, this is a reconstruction based off of fossil material that's been found. This is a lower jaw. It's a cast of a lower jaw of Gigantopithecus, and was found in China. And so you've got this 8-foot tall, gorilla-looking primate that lived at the time. It lived about a little over 1.5 million years ago.
And he's got big feet.
Big feet, ginormous hands. If you were to take a modern lowland gorilla silverback, it's almost probably 3 times the size of that.
It's huge.
And so again, you get these stories of ape men that are in cultures all over the world. Sasquatch, the Yeti. There's stories in the south of swamp apes and things like that. So
we did the Bigfoot Museum or Sasquatch Museum.
Oh, you did?
In China Creek, California.
Oh, how was that?
It was pretty cool.
Okay.
It was a lot of fun.
Okay.
And, got to see some imprints of some feet imprints and the castings and stuff and the videos and
sure.
It was fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Pictures and stories.
Greeny video.
Yeah.
Well, see, we walked into the land realm here. So we talk about Bigfoot. We talk about the unicorns. We have a again, quote unquote, life-size unicorn here.
Well, but we know what happened to the unicorn.
Oh, what?
Have you never heard the song by the Irish Rovers, the unicorn song?
No.
You haven't ever heard that. You need to look it up.
Okay,
It happened at the time of Noah. The unicorns, when the flood was coming, they were playing silly games, and they did not get on the ship the way that they were supposed to. They missed the boat.
They missed the boat.
And that's why we have no unicorns to this very day.
Okay.
Irish Rovers.
Okay.
It was a fairly popular song back in 1968, 69, somewhere in there.
All right, I'll have to go back and
But now we know what happened to them.
Well, unicorns, again, they show up as far back in literature and, going back to the late Grecian, early Roman times. There's a lot of different discussion on what were they seeing, and there's quite a few different possibilities, if you're looking for a natural history origin for the unicorn. Even today we can get goats and other animals that have horns that you normally have two horns that will grow one, and so you'll get something that superficially looks like unicorn. I can't remember the philosopher. It might have been Pliny the Elder, Roman philosopher, went down to Africa. Which really wasn't that, for Italy to North Africa really wasn't that huge of a trip, and talked about seeing giant, heavy-set unicorns down there. Well, what has one big horn down in Africa? And it's the rhino.
Yeah.
So it's, again, pretty easy to interpret that, it's got one horn, it's got four legs. Well, the closest thing I can think of is a unicorn, so it's got to be a unicorn. A lot of not really museums, but places of interest, town halls and whatnot in some of the northern European countries would have so-called unicorn horns on display. 1500s, things like that. And what's interesting is Scandinavia, the northern European countries, and many times these so-called unicorn horns were actually the tusk of a narwhal whale.
Okay. And you've got a tusk here that looks very much like what they portray the unicorn horns to look like.
Yep. Well, and a lot of especially in the medieval cultures, medieval towns, they would want these type of oddities to get people to come there, because even back then they knew, well, if we get people to come take a look at our unicorn horn, they're going to buy a mug of ale, they're going to get a meal here, they're going to do an overnight. So, it tied into early tourism, I guess, is the way you could look at it.
Well, what's the possibility of some of the early knights and stuff having adorned their horses with horns as weapons of war?
That's entirely possible. In fact, some of the big English Shire horses that were used, for knights, because the Shire horse was so huge and could, a fully armored knight
could ride one
without breaking. They would be armored, and you would also often see they would have helmets on that would have protruding.
Right.
I guess the idea was that they would just run their horse right into a phalanx of soldiers, and hopefully the horse would put its head down and just use that ramrod to plow right through. But it's not unheard of for your gentry and your knights of old to adorn their horses with ornamental things like horns and whatnot.
Well, and the horse is such a mythical creature anyway. I mean, Pegasus and they were used for so many different things.
They were a kind of a multiversal creature.
Not just that, but they were also kind of elevated to a different status of all other animals because of the work that they did, I guess, for people. So I could see how a lot of different mythical creatures could come from a horse just because of
Oh yeah, yeah.
the attraction that humans have to them.
Yep.
I mean, even today.
Well, I mean, yeah. So you've got the horse, and we saw the Pegasus a little bit ago, which is basically
Right.
the bodies of what they call the bow plan is that of a horse, a unicorn. When we were back there just a little ways, we talked about the griffin. Well, in Mongolia, Mongolia is very well known for its fossil dinosaur remains.
Right.
And there's a dinosaur called the Protoceratops, which is very, very common in the Cretaceous age rocks of Mongolia. This is a cast of the skull of a Protoceratops. Notice how it has a really big beak.
Right.
And it has this kind of big head shield.
Sheltered, yeah.
And what's interesting is stories of these griffins came about around the time of the Silk Road trade. And the Silk Road would go all the way up into Mongolia, again looking for gold and other precious ores while they were trading silk. And it's pretty interesting that if you go that route now, it is not uncommon to find a Protoceratops like this here, weathering out.
Oh, really?
Yep. So you can imagine a silk caravan going by and seeing skeletons of these things laying there, and then when they come back, they have these stories of griffins being up there and flying around and so on and so forth. So potentially another natural history origin for the griffin. These ones are pretty solid in their natural history origin. So everyone knows the story of the Cyclops.
Right.
A Greek story of a giant humanoid-like creature that has one big eye in the center of its head, etc. And so one of the things that's interesting is that Greece is known in several locations for its fossil mammoths.
Okay.
And of course, here we have a cast of a dwarf mammoth skull. And if you look at it, at first glance, you'll see this big opening right in the middle of the skull. It's somewhat of a, you can look at it and you intuitively know it's a skull.
Right.
It
Yes.
kind of has a human-like shape to it, but it's bigger. A full-grown mammoth or a non-dwarf species mammoth skull could be like this.
Oh, yeah.
And if you'd never seen an elephant skeleton, which most Grecians hadn't, you wouldn't know that big opening right in the middle is not for the eye, but it's called the nares, where the trunk
comes out.
And it's basically where the animal breathes through there. So you'd look at this, and there may be some other bones around it that you knew were leg bones or arm bones, and your first thought was like, oh, wow, there's some giant human-like creature walking around that has a single eye. A lot of our early giant stories come from Greece. Again, big leg bones, things like that. So, your story of the Titan gods and things like that.
Right.
So, again, it makes a lot of sense that, some of these myths on Cyclops and Greek giants come from their interpretation of fossils, which they would have seen weathering out of hills, big leg bones, big skulls, things like that.
This is so cool.
We're actually walking right underneath one of the Asian dragons here. This is a Chinese dragon. And
This is one of the ones that they march in parades with.
Yep.
10 or 12 guys underneath.
Yep.
And
Yep. So,
wow. This is really cool. I didn't realize they had that kind of an internal structure. They've got an internal structure, I guess, kind of like a canoe with bows and a main ridge coming through and place for.
Yeah, this is one of the creatures that is considered, or the dragon that's considered to be a protector of its community, and it is a benevolent force for the most part. You don't cross them, obviously, but but if it showed favor to your community, you were in good luck. Like it helped control the rains, the weather. You could expect good crops, things like that. Like I said, totally different from the European dragons, which actually we have a cast of a pretty cool fossil over here. This is interesting because, again, it shows how this dragon skull is actually a skull of a Ice Age woolly rhinoceros. So woolly rhinoceroses lived in Europe and Siberia 20, 30,000 years ago. And this was found, and it was put in a town hall in Austria. And they said it was a dragon skull, evidence of a dragon. It is clearly not. But whether they knew it wasn't is the question. Were they just using it to lure people to their community, or did they honestly think, well, maybe they did? No one had ever seen a rhinoceros. It
looks like a dragon skull to me.
So it could look like a dragon skull. We have over here all the various cultural items that many Asian cultures intertwine dragons with. I think it just shows how important the myth of the dragon is to this day. And like I said, being given the name or the title dragon is very important.
And you've got some headdresses and some plates and little statues and some of that kind of stuff that have the dragon prominently.
And opera dresses as well.
Wow, that is really an ornate dress. That is cool. It's an Oriental dress. Lots of, do I want to call them flaps or?
There's a lot of. Yes, there's a lot of layers to it.
Yep. Layers, flaps, something. But lots of dragons, lots of ornate stuff. That is really a pretty piece. And another Oriental jacket with dragons on it.
Yep. So these are, so you can see here, this is a shaman's coat. Dragons are on the front and back. This is indicative of the owl culture. And so, like I said, there's a component of this whole exhibit that deals with culture and how these things tie into the various cultures. So,
wow. And then you've got a video going with some people in China or someplace in Asia that's running one of these dragons that we were just talking about that are 40 feet long with a bunch of people working with it.
Yep. And
wow.
And actually one of the things it's a holdover is that ground up dragon bone is something that many Asian cultures believe that they mix that in with their food or drink that gives them longevity, gives them power, and the flip side of that is that there are a lot of fossil dinosaurs that are found in Mongolia, China, other places, and poaching is a concern. The Chinese government is always trying to deal with that, and what happens a lot of times is some of these bones are collected and then ground up, thinking that to this day, that people think that these are dragons.
Wow.
And so anyhow, that it still has a holdover to this very day.
That's amazing. It's amazing that the myths have gone on as long as what they have, and it still endure. But you know, why would they disappear? I guess would be the big question. Just because we think that we have science and some of that, there's still.
Well, you know,
Loch Ness is still running around. Bigfoot's still running around. Chupacabra's just come about.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we keep coming up with all these things that keep us occupied with this fantasy world.
Well, and to be honest with you, I myself personally don't want to live completely in a world where everything has to be explained scientifically. I like to have a little bit of
Me too.
a little bit of, gee, could it be possible, or a little bit of superstition here and there, a little bit of, mythical creatures. Wouldn't that be cool if this thing really did exist? That kind of stuff. I still, well, I won't talk about Santa Claus because you may have some young visitors, viewers.
Right.
But
yeah,
there's things that you still kind of want to believe in a little bit, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So actually, we just got this back up and running. This is a fun thing that you can do where you can actually create a dragon, and you can create it with wings, without wings, with legs, etc. And then it'll populate up in the video here.
This is kind of a cartoonish create your own dragon. You can start with your body style, and you can make wings or head or whatever, and it comes up on a screen. You can have them puffing smoke or flying, swimming. Linda's having fun. She's making her dragon right now. So.
Oh, look at him! Isn't he gorgeous?
Can you pick colors too? Anyway,
and then
2 legs, 4 legs, no legs.
You want multi-head, one head, or like?
Guy, right?
Okay.
Oh, look at him! Isn't he tough looking?
Now you hit done and release your dragon.
Oh, you're gonna release the dragon.
And so then it pops up here, right there. There's your dragon.
Your dragon.
Look at his feet.
Of course, you'd make him look like a chicken.
So this exhibit's been very popular. We extended it to the end of the year. We've had a series of evening programmings with this exhibit. In fact, one of the people that shows up in some of the videos here, Dr. Adrienne gave a talk just a few weeks ago here. Her research, she's gone to several different cultures, again, kind of trying to trace the roots of some of these origins and then tie them to any sort of natural history stuff. And she's in this video here. She was here. We've had several tours come through here, and we got a few other presentations that tie into this before the year is done. And then you can see we got a pretty good turnout for this early Friday afternoon.
It was a lot busier a little bit earlier this Friday morning.
Okay.
It was this place was packed.
Good.
When we first got here.
Good.
Yes. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate you taking us through here and showing us and explaining and talking and going down the myth rabbit holes wherever we went with it.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was a fun to have this exhibit here. Like I said, I'm very excited that this is the first time that we've had an exhibit from the American Museum of Natural History. We'll probably have a few more. And the idea, again, being, a couple times a year, we will have different exhibits in here. And part of our mission is to bring, expose our visitors to Montana, but then also bring Montana to the world and stuff. So sometimes you'll see things in these traveling exhibit halls that aren't Montana specific, but that's fine because we have visitors that come from all over the world. And of course, we've got folks from Montana that would like to see, that grew up here and said, we know about Montana, show us something else. So you'll come here sometimes and you'll see exhibits on various artists. You'll see our next exhibit, which will be opening in early February, is called Sue, the T-Rex Experience, which is out of the Field Museum in Chicago.
Oh.
And it's this giant Tyrannosaurus Rex, the most complete in the world. and it'll be all about the science, research, and what we know, and how because this dinosaur is so complete, we know so much more about T-Rex, which is probably the most famous dinosaur ever, and we'll have that exhibit all the way through Labor Day of next year.
Okay.
So
I think I came here. My daughter was going to college here in Bozeman, and I think we came up here and saw one with Da Vinci.
oh yeah, we have
several years ago.
Yep, we've had a Da Vinci exhibit.
And I think I was up here another time with another exhibit, another traveling exhibit. And these things are always so much fun. You guys didn't have the Titanic here, did you?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
I must have seen that. Oh, I think I saw that at OMSI in Portland, Oregon.
And we've had several exhibits from OMSI. They make really good family-friendly kind of kids-focused exhibits.
Right.
So we'll bring those in. We had a Vikings exhibit a couple years ago.
Maybe that's one that I saw here. I actually hit over 100 museums a year.
Oh, nice.
Not all of them end up on podcast form, but if I'm driving down the road and see a museum, if I can get a podcast, I will. If I can't, I still just go. And 100 museums a year is probably about right.
Okay.
And so remembering where I've seen everything is kind of hard to do sometimes, but
okay.
Yeah.
Well, some of these bigger museums, like the Field Museum, Chicago, New York, produce a lot of their own exhibits that they travel around. And then there's other companies that specifically do exhibits as well. So the nice thing is we've got kind of a wide menu of things that we can choose from. We have a committee that includes several members of our staff, and I encourage everyone, if you see an exhibit where you're down in Denver, you're over, down in LA or Salt Lake or wherever, and you see something cool, bring it to the table and we'll research it and see, is it available? How much space are we going to need for it, et cetera? Do we fit their requirements? And then we'll see if we can get it in here. And so,
and the museum is just excellent as the museum itself without the traveling displays.
Yep.
And to be able to come back once or twice a year and see a traveling display and still go back through some of the other things is such a good deal.
Yep.
I mean, just because every time you go through, you see something different.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
We have our exhibits are very good. They're very specimen based. You'll see, the nice thing I like to say is that you'll see the real thing here.
Yes.
And so we have a tremendous collections on the paleontology, cultural, and historical side of things. And so you're going to see the real deal.
Yeah, and that is just so cool. Well, I so appreciate your time today.
Oh, my pleasure.
And the way I usually finish out my podcast, we may still go to to the farm part of the museum. I don't know whether we'll end up with that or not, because there is a whole nother. Just briefly describe what the other part of the museum is. The farm.
So the Tinsley Farmstead is a family had a two-story house that they had built. Started off as a log cabin type hut that was built up over the years. In the 1890s, they had a two-story house where the husband and wife and I think they had 7 children lived in this house.
Wow.
And it was over near Three Forks, which is about 40 minutes west of here. And that house was brought here a few decades ago, and basically to build an interpretive center of what life in the late 1800s, circa 1900, was like in western Montana. So there is a little field, there's a chicken coop, there's a blacksmith shop. The house itself, in the summertime, we have interpreters out there that you can walk into the house and they'll talk to you about what life was like. They might be baking a pie. They might be making ice cream. They might be making iced tea.
So they're doing some of the actual skills.
They're doing the stuff.
And they do this all summer long?
Yeah, we open it up Memorial Day weekend and run it through. This year we ran it through September on the weekends.
Okay.
We close it on the weekdays after Labor Day, but then the weekends we kept kept going this year.
Cool.
And took advantage of the warm weather that we've been having in September's these days.
And we're now into October, so that part of the museum is closed.
It is closed.
But anyway, I appreciate you describing that part. And as I always finish out my podcasts, I say the world is full of wonder. People need to get out and explore. You need to come see this stuff because it is way cool. And much better seeing it in person than on YouTube, I can tell you that.
That's a fact.
And everybody have an absolutely wonder-filled day.
All the roll and go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?